Jesus says, you have heard it said, love your neighbors and hate your enemies. But I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I love this verse. And it's kind of a hard verse. It's convicted me on more than one occasion that I'm not quite following the way of Jesus like I should. But I love this verse because Jesus cuts right through our genteel, southern, nice culture. Jesus does not say, be nice to everyone and don't have any enemies. But that's really the message that we inherit and that's programmed into us every day. Be nice to everyone. Don't have enemies. Jesus validates having enemies. And it reminds me of a story one time. Many of you might know that before we lived here, we lived in Nashville. And before I was a youth minister, I worked at a private Christian school. And I was a teacher and a coach. And it was my first real job. And I was just getting beaten up. I couldn't make anybody happy, but I kept trying and trying and trying, and I would please this person, and it would upset this person, and I would give a break to somebody on a test that they had done really poorly on, and it would make this parent mad, or something else in sports or in extracurriculars or whatever, and I was complaining about this to the head football coach, who was a mentor of mine, and he is this old, southern, good old boy, and I'll never forget, he said to me, son, if you're trying to make everyone happy, you're not standing for anything. And that wasn't good news to me in the moment, because the only thing important for me was to get everyone to like me. And it reframed things in a way that kind of hurt at the moment, that actually maybe the more important thing is that you have some values. And that when people work against those values, they're your enemies. So I want you to stop for a moment and think about who your enemy is. Jesus never tells us not to have enemies. Think about what's important to you and what you value. Who's the person that goes against all of those? Who's the person who drives you crazy? And no matter how nice you try to be to them, they just keep driving you more and more crazy. So we're going to start in reverse here. Love your enemies. Here's the word, enemies. If you're standing up for something, there are going to be people in this world who work against you. Jesus had enemies. One person I admire a lot and look up to and learn a lot from is Martin Luther King Jr. He was a God-fearing Christian man who had enemies, and he even named them. He talks about Bull Connor, a sheriff in Alabama who turned dogs and fire hoses on peaceful protesters. And he mentions him by name in some of his sermons as somebody who they will not allow to scare them out of what they feel God calling them to do. And so I think it's appropriate to read a little bit from a sermon of Dr. King's, because Dr. King had enemies. But this is what he said when he preached on this passage about praying for your enemies, loving your enemies. Dr. King says, this love isn't some sort of sentimentality or good feeling about somebody. When Jesus bids us to love our enemies, he is speaking of neither eros, which is romantic love, nor philos, which is brotherly or sisterly love. He is speaking of agape, understanding and creative, redemptive goodwill for all mankind. Only by following this way and responding with this type of love are we able to be children of our Father who is in heaven. I wonder if Dr. King ever prayed for Bull Connor by name, and if he disciplined himself to have love in his heart for Sheriff Connor. Agape love imagines what's best for Sheriff Connor. And Dr. King talked about this too. He pointed out that systemic racism in America was not just a cage for African Americans. It was a cage for white people too. Because this type of hate and dehumanization for humanity destroys everyone who's a part of it. And while people like Sheriff Connor may have lived in cages made out of gold, they're still in cages. And so I imagine Dr. King praying for Sheriff Connor, praying that he would also be released from this system of injustice that kills everyone. Agape love looks at the person you cannot stand, and it spends time imagining what it might look like if their life was thriving. So I have a very specific experiment for you to do if you and your huddle choose this. I want you to actually think about who your enemy is. You've already done that. I want you to take some time and use your imagination, because imagination and prayer go hand in hand. And I want you to imagine the best possible thing for the person who drives you crazy. What is the thing? What would their life look like if they were living life most abundantly? What would it look like if everyone were kind to them and they were kind to everyone else? And what would have to change? I want you to spend time prayerfully imagining your enemy succeeding in life. And maybe that doesn't look like if they're a bully and they keep pounding on people, because that's not them succeeding. What would it look like if the best possible thing happened to them? Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.